I'll be the first to admit that when I heard they were making a new Doom game, I wasn't too impressed. For starters, it didn't really need any kind of revival. The original game still lives on strongly through the modding community. More so, I wasn't too happy that Bethesda were also involved. It's a game series I have a lot of love for, and playing with my favourite franchises is like playing with my emotions. But after finally having played the campaign and binged my way through the whole thing in 2 sittings, I can finally say, id Software, you did it. You glorious bastards, you actually did it. Of course, I'm referring to the single player campaign, not the multiplayer. I'm not about ready to open a can of worms with the multiplayer just yet, so this video is going to be all about the single player campaign primarily. So Doom 4 is everything I hoped it would have been. Yes, I know it's called Doom, but I'm calling it Doom 4 to avoid confusion. It's fast paced, it's challenging, it's violent, gorgeous, and it's enjoyable from start to finish. It's full of fan service, and it's made by people who clearly understand and love the original games. There's a few areas which are reimagined maps from the old games, and they've even included monster infighting. It's hands down the best FPS I've played all year, and one of the best FPS games to come along in a long while. So the game opens with your character strapped to some sort of demonic altar and breaking himself free from chains before being released onto the UAC base, which has gone to hell, quite literally, as a woman named Olivia Pierce has apparently orchestrated a demonic invasion. Now, there's not really much to spoil in this game, so I'll be using footage from various points in the campaign, and it probably shouldn't be a spoiler that you both go to hell and fight a cyber demon and spider mastermind. I mean, that's about as much a spoiler as it is saying you fight Goombas in Super Mario Bros. Anyway, you're guided by your allied Dr. Samuel Hayden, who contacts you at various points throughout the campaign, but there's not all that much going on in the way of plot. There's about 4 or 5 times absolute tops in the entire thing where you have to stand still for more than like 10 seconds and listen to expository dialogue. You're mostly just moving through the levels completing objectives when you're not killing things. Having said that though, this is very much old school level design where you're kind of dropped into these complex multi-leveled areas allowing you to do things in the manner you choose. A lot of the combat areas are more like small deathmatch arenas where a bunch of demons spawn in and you wipe them all out before moving on. There is a few linear moments, but most of the time you're able to do things at your own pace, and like any old school game, there's plenty of secrets hidden in out of the way places. As is pretty standard for a modern game, there's lots of challenges and upgrades to acquire as well. You earn weapon tokens by completing combat challenges, such as killing a certain amount of enemies or killing them in a certain style. These are then spent on upgrading the primary and alternate fire modes for your weapons, of which each weapon has 2. You'll also earn tokens to upgrade your suit, giving you resistance to damage types and reducing the cooldowns for your various combat abilities. And then lastly, there's Argent Energy, again an upgrade that improves your base stats for armor, health, and ammo limits. Now these upgrades aren't essential. I mean, a purist could probably finish the entire game without any of them, but it does give the game some replayability, and also makes you feel like you're progressing your character's abilities the more you play the game. It all flows right back into the combat, which is really the heart and soul of Doom 4. And holy shit, this game is violent. All of the weapons we know and love make a return. We've got the shotgun, the super shotgun, the chain gun, plasma gun, and of course the BFG and chainsaw. The BFG and chainsaw are kind of one-off items in a sense where you're given very little ammo for them, but they wreck all kinds of shit when used. The BFG will practically one-shot everything in your near vicinity, and the chainsaw will also one-shot an enemy using a certain amount of fuel depending on the enemy type. So your standard imp's going to require 1 charge, but a Hell Knight or Mancubus will need 3 or maybe 4. All of the weapons have multiple alternate fire modes as well, so the plasma gun can build up excess heat and let it out in this damaging shockwave. The machine gun has a rapid fire missile system, and the rocket launcher can lock onto an enemy and fire 3 quick rockets in succession. Later in the campaign, you'll need to switch back and forth between these guns on the fly during some of the more chaotic combat sequences, which I can't imagine is going to be easy on a controller, but it's seamless on the PC. And there's also an upgrade that makes weapon switching faster as well. I gotta say, it's great seeing all these old enemy types again and seeing how they've been brought into 2016. Hell Knights are now a lot more agile, leaping large distances and moving quite quickly compared to how slow they'd skulk around in Doom 3. Imps often leap around as well, often holding onto ledges and throwing fireballs at you from a distance. Pinky Demons are now armoured and can only be taken out from behind, and Lost Souls now go into a sort of kamikaze mode, which makes them even more annoying than they were before. About the only enemy type that hasn't been changed all that much is the Mancubus, who still just kind of lunges towards you, firing away with his hand cannons. But this is good old-fashioned projectile-based combat at its absolute best, and it's all about moving around, being aware of your surroundings, and minimizing the damage you take, which is essential as Doom 4 is a genuinely challenging game. I chose to play the game on Ultra Violence for my first playthrough, and I'm kinda glad I did because I found it a good level of difficulty which was offset with the new weapons and upgrades I was gaining. I will admit though, there's a few cheap areas which don't have a good flow and are a bit constricting, but most of the areas you fight in facilitate lots of movement, which is essential as standing in one place is going to get you killed really quickly. What's also cool is how each of the enemy types has their own individual death animation. Now, a central mechanic of the game are the glory kills, where we're able to finish off an enemy with a grisly execution. And this will differ greatly depending on the enemy type and also which body part you're targeting. Now, it could be the difference between ripping someone's arm off and beating them to death with it, or pulling their neck around 180 degrees and almost snapping their goddamn head off. Glory kills aren't as necessary or tedious as some people make them out to be either. They only take 1 or 2 seconds and there's plenty of health throughout the levels as is anyway. But look, I don't want to sound like I'm just blindly praising the game like it's some kind of masterpiece. For starters, whilst the game does look pretty damn good, the performance I've had hasn't been the best. I'm running the game on the recommended settings and the frame rate still has a tendency to stutter in certain areas, even with the latest drivers. I mean, it's not bringing everything to a grinding halt, but it's definitely noticeable. There's sort of a side mode called Rune Trials, which are these challenge modes on a very strict time limit, and these things are literally just trial and error. There's only one path to complete them, and it always comes down to the wire. I mean, replaying these things over and over is a bit tedious. It sucks. Let's also address the elephant in the room. Yes, the game uses checkpoints, and yes, they're horrible. There's nothing fun about fighting 50 demons flawlessly, getting killed, then having to fight them all over again. Also, checkpoints in a Doom game seems like sacrilege. More of a subjective thing is also the way they've packaged up the physical copy of the game. Now, after you've gotten the disc for the game, they still make you download like an extra 40 gigabytes on top of that. For people like myself who have crappy internet, that's kind of the whole reason we buy physical copies of games, to not have to spend a day downloading the rest. The only explanation I can come up with is that they did this to save money on having to distribute more DVDs. The only other issue I had, and again this is more of a subjective thing, is that the game at times doesn't feel like a Doom game, if that makes sense. There's some platforming sections where you're pulling yourself over ledges and making double jumps across bottomless pits which feel out of place. I guess overall I'd say it doesn't feel authentic, but it's hard to put my finger on it. And I really kind of wish they just made this as a blatant homage to Doom and called it something else entirely, because the game would still stand as it is, regardless of the title. Slapping the Doom name on it just seems like a lame way to get the game more notoriety. I mean, I guarantee you if id Software had have instead developed this as a throwback to old school FPS, as opposed to a Doom reboot, it would have garnered the same attention. I guess the real takeaway is that the game is just so much fun to play. I mean, after I finally got it all downloaded, I literally binged it for about 5 hours. Then the next day I came back and binged it for another 3 hours until it was all over. It's that good. Doom 4 is like a plate of Reuben sandwiches, but imagine you've got someone just standing there shoving the next one down your throat before you've even finished the previous bite. And you love Reuben sandwiches so much that you just keep on chomping them down. It's everything you want in a game with the Doom moniker. No weapon limit, no health regeneration, no sprinting, barely any cinematics, and no weapon reloading. Rip and tear, Sonny Jim. Rip and tear.